At 3:41 a.m. local time, under a moonless sky in the eastern Caribbean Sea, 110 nautical miles north of La Guaira, the calm inside the U.S. aircraft carrier's Combat Information Center broke without warning. A low, flat tone cut through the room. Not loud, not urgent yet, but unmistakable. A junior radar operator leaned closer to his screen. What had been empty blue moments earlier now showed movement, faint at first, then sharper. 5 surface contacts, tight grouping, speed increasing. No one spoke. The carrier was moving at a steady 20 knots, holding a planned transit corridor that had been approved days earlier. Nothing about this stretch of water was supposed to be contested tonight. Intelligence briefings had flagged political noise, posturing, radio statements. Nothing actionable, yet the contacts kept coming. Surface tracks bearing 180, the operator said quietly. Range, 46 nautical miles. Closing. The officer of the deck didn't answer right away. He stepped closer, eyes locked on the display. 5 returns, warship-sized signatures. Not fishing vessels, not Coast Guard cutters, military hulls. Outside on the bridge, the night air was heavy and still. The carrier's bow cut a smooth black line through the water. Its deck lights dimmed to operational levels. From up here, the sea looked empty. Calm, deceptively harmless. Below, the picture was changing fast. At 3:44 a.m., the contacts altered course. All 5 turned together, not aggressively, precisely. They aligned on a vector that intersected the carrier's projected track. The navigator's finger slid across the chart table. If they hold this heading, he stopped himself before finishing the sentence. Everyone in the room already understood. They weren't shadowing, they were positioning. The tactical action officer took a breath. Classify. The reply came after a brief pause. Profiles match Venezuelan Navy surface combatants, likely mix of frigates and patrol vessels. No one asked which ones. That detail would come later. What mattered was intent. Distance dropped to 40 nautical miles. The carrier strike group maintained course. No speed change. No evasive maneuver. Doctrine demanded discipline, especially now. At 3:47 a.m., the Venezuelan ships began transmitting, not hails, broadcasts. Their signal washed across multiple frequencies, strong and deliberate. Spanish language warnings clipped and formal, declaring the waters ahead restricted, sovereign, non-negotiable. The bridge officer listened without reacting. He let the transmission end, then waited. No reply was sent. Silence stretched. The Venezuelan ships didn't slow. 36 nautical miles. In the CIC, a quiet tension settled in. Chairs stopped creaking. Conversations died mid-thought. Every eye tracked the shrinking range numbers. Recommend notifying the strike group commander, someone said softly. The call was already being made. At 3:52 a.m., the carrier's air search radar picked up additional returns. High altitude, fast, likely maritime patrol aircraft lifting off from the Venezuelan coast. The picture was no longer local, it was layered. The commanding officer entered the CIC without ceremony. He stood behind the tactical plot, hands clasped behind his back, studying the evolving geometry. 5 warships ahead, aircraft above, a narrowing corridor of water. He didn't speak. 29 nautical miles. On the hangar deck, sailors paused as an unspoken readiness rippled through the ship. No alarms yet, no announcements. But posture shifted. Movements became economical, purposeful. On the flight deck, yellow shirts adjusted positions. Red shirts checked safeties. Everything looked routine to an outsider. To those trained to read the signs, the carrier was quietly waking up. At 3:58 a.m., the Venezuelan formation spread. 2 ships edged left, 2 right, 1 held center, a barrier. They weren't charging, they weren't retreating, they were placing steel in the carrier's path, calculating time and distance down to the minute. Range 22 nautical miles, the radar operator said. No radio calls followed. The room went quiet. Imagine standing on that bridge. Hundreds of millions of dollars of ship beneath your feet, thousands of lives aboard, and ahead of you 5 foreign warships slowly closing the door. Every second mattered. The carrier's escorts tightened formation without orders being spoken aloud. A destroyer slid closer on the starboard quarter. Another adjusted off the port beam. Their radars painted the same picture. Their commanders watching the same numbers tick down. At 4:03 a.m., the Venezuelan broadcasts resumed. Stronger this time, more forceful. A declaration that continued movement would be considered a violation, that consequences would follow. Still no response. The commanding officer finally spoke, his voice low and even. Maintain course. Maintain speed. It wasn't bravado, it was calculation. Distance. 18 nautical miles. At this range, intentions become harder to disguise. Any sudden maneuver would be obvious. Any weapons activation unmistakable. Inside the CIC, a weapons officer quietly confirmed system statuses. Nothing was energized beyond normal readiness. No missile doors opening. No fire control radars locking on visible restraint. At 4:07 a.m., one Venezuelan ship surged ahead of the others. Its speed jumped sharply. It cut across the projected track, aiming to cross the carrier's bow at close range. Contact accelerating, the operator reported. New CPA, 3,000 yards. A near miss. The bridge crew stiffened. The carrier held steady, its massive momentum unchanged. The Venezuelan ship passed ahead, its running lights stark against the darkness, then slowed again, sliding back into position. A message sent without words. Enemy pressure increased. At 4:11 a.m., the Venezuelan aircraft descended. Radar returns dropped from high altitude to medium, then low. They were no longer just watching, they were asserting presence. Still, no shots fired, no locks, no warnings. The strike group commander's voice finally came over the internal circuit. Calm, controlled, asking for assessments, time, options. The answer came back measured and deliberate. The carrier could turn away, it could slow, it could stop, or it could hold. At 4:16 a.m., the range dropped to 12 nautical miles. This was the moment where escalation could happen, where a single misread radar sweep or misunderstood maneuver could spiral. The Venezuelan ships tightened again, their barrier now unmistakable. The commanding officer looked up. "If you were the officer in command," he said quietly to no one in particular, "what would you do?" No one answered, because the decision was already being made, not with weapons, not with speed, but with something else. At 4:18 a.m., the carrier executed a move no one on the Venezuelan side expected, and the sea suddenly felt very different. The carrier did not turn away, it did not slow. At 4:18 a.m., its course changed by just 3 degrees to port, barely perceptible to the naked eye, invisible from the bridge windows, but on every radar display in the Venezuelan formation, the geometry shifted instantly. That tiny adjustment did something critical. It broke the barrier. The central Venezuelan ship was now no longer directly ahead. The left flank vessels found their calculated intercept slipping. The right flank suddenly faced a closing angle they hadn't planned for. Not retreat, not defiance. A reframing of the problem. New projected track entered, the navigator said quietly. The carrier's massive hull continued forward, unhurried, its wake unchanged. To anyone not watching the tactical plot, nothing dramatic had happened, but in the CIC, every officer saw it. The Venezuelan commander now had seconds to decide. If they held position, the carrier would pass between two of their ships, inside a narrowing corridor of steel and sensors. At that distance, any sudden maneuver would risk collision. Any aggressive action would be unmistakable. The room went silent again. Distance, 10 nautical miles. No radio calls followed. On the Venezuelan frequencies, the warning stopped. At 4:21 a.m., one of the 5 ships hesitated, just a fraction. Its speed dipped by 2 knots, then 3. The formation wavered. Contact on the right flank decelerating, the operator said. Others maintaining speed. The carrier did nothing. It didn't exploit the hesitation, didn't accelerate, didn't maneuver further. It simply continued. This was discipline made visible. The escorts mirrored the carrier's adjustment, sliding with practiced precision, maintaining coverage without crowding the lane that was opening ahead. At 4:24 a.m., the Venezuelan aircraft climbed again. Their radar returns rose sharply, backing off from low altitude passes. A subtle change, but one that didn't go unnoticed. Pressure was being released, but the moment was still fragile. 8 nautical miles. Imagine standing on the bridge now. The enemy ships close enough that their hull shapes could soon be picked out by the naked eye. Close enough that any mistake would be irreversible. Every second mattered. The commanding officer kept his eyes forward. His hands rested lightly on the railing. No outward sign of tension. Below him, the CIC tracked every bearing change, every speed fluctuation, every electronic whisper. At 4:27 a.m., the Venezuelan center ship altered course. 2 degrees starboard, then 5. It was subtle, but decisive. The barrier dissolved. The remaining ships followed, one by one, peeling outward, opening a gap that widened with each passing second. No announcement was made, no declaration of retreat, just movement, distance, 6 nautical miles. The carrier passed through the space where the blockade had been. No weapons powered up, no alarms sounded, no cheers erupted, just quiet professionalism. At 4:31 a.m., the Venezuelan broadcasts resumed briefly, short, formal, no longer threatening, a statement of continued monitoring. The reply from the carrier was minimal, a neutral acknowledgement, nothing more. As the gap widened, the Venezuelan ships fell back into loose trail positions, no longer obstructing, no longer pressing. They had blinked, but no one aboard the carrier framed it that way, because tonight wasn't about winning, it was about not losing control. At 4:36 a.m., the range began to increase. 10 nautical miles, 15. The Venezuelan aircraft turned south, heading back toward the coastline. Their radar returns faded gradually, not abruptly, as if unwilling to signal a complete disengagement. The strike group maintained course for another hour, every system still alert, every watch still tight. No one relaxed yet, because encounters like this don't end when the ships separate. They echo, in reports written later, in briefings reviewed by analysts, in quiet recalculations by commanders on both sides who replay every moment, every choice, every hesitation. Back in the CIC, a junior officer finally exhaled. That was close. No one corrected him. At 5:12 a.m., as dawn began to soften the horizon, the commanding officer addressed the watch team. His voice was steady, reflective. "Remember this," he said. "What mattered wasn't what we could do. It was what we chose not to do." Outside, the sea looked unchanged, calm, endless, but beneath that calm sat unanswered questions. What happens next time? What if the ships are closer, the margins smaller, the commanders less patient? Tonight, discipline held. Tonight, restraint shaped the outcome. But in waters where signals replace words and silence carries meaning, nothing is ever settled for long. Would you have made the same call? Tell us in the comments, and subscribe, because next time, the decision might not end the same way.